Hey everybody, and welcome back to RPG Dojo, where we talk guides and builds for the world's biggest games. Now, in this video, we're diving deep into New World, a massive multiplayer online RPG with an overwhelming amount of possibilities and playstyles. During my playtime in the various betas that were available for New World, I tested as many builds as I could think of for solo content, group content, PvE, and PvP. And I've come up with this list of my favorite builds that you can try out for yourself once the game goes live. For each build, we'll talk about weapons, attributes, skills, equipment, and more. And I'm also working on written guides for each of these over at our website, rpgdojo.com, so make sure to check that out when you're ready to see more. That being said, let's jump right into the builds. First up, let's look at some group builds with what will most likely be the meta tank setup for years to come in New World. This build, of course, is focused on heavy armor for the extra physical and elemental resistance. Plus, you'll also want to pick up a kite shield for maximum block effectiveness. And speaking of shields, we will definitely be running sword and shield as the primary weapon on this build, as you would definitely with any tank setup in New World. Sword and shield just has the best skills in the game when it comes to tanking, which we'll look at in just a minute. Obviously, you also get the extra armor, the block stability from equipping a shield, which is going to be fantastic for tanking as well. Now, your secondary weapon on this build is going to be the hatchet. You might not expect this on a tank build. The hatchet in New World is actually a strong melee damage dealer type weapon. It's great for both PvE and PvP combat, but it also has one of the best skills in the game for tanks, which heals you for a percentage of your health every few seconds and also taunts all enemies around you. That's right, you can pick up an AoE taunt if you use the hatchet. And as far as attributes for the meta tank, it's actually very simple. You'll want to focus first on Constitution and not much else. This is because Constitution in New World translates directly into more health for your character, and as a tank you want as much health as possible. Putting points into Constitution will also result in some nice perks for tanking, including better healing from your potions, increased health and armor, and even more passive damage reduction. Finally, for skills, make sure to pick up Shield Rush and Shield Bash for the extra crowd control and mobility for the sword and shield, plus Defiant Stance, which is an AoE taunt on your main weapon that also heals you when it expires. For the hatchet, we already mentioned the skill Berserk. That's one of the best skills in the game. As we said, healing plus the AoE taunt is fantastic. And then for the rest of your hatchet skills, just feel free to put in whatever else you want. I prefer to use Feral Rush and Raging Torrent. Next, let's talk about an easy healer for group content. That's going to be our Ice Cleric build. Now, this comes with tons of healing power as well as group utility skills and even some extra damage to help out your group. First, the primary weapon on this healer will of course be the Life Staff. This is definitely the way to go for any build focused primarily on healing in the game, and it offers a great mix of single target burst healing, healing over time, as well as AoE heals. Now, my secondary weapon of choice for this build is going to be the Ice Gauntlet, and that's mainly due to the nature of this weapon and not the element itself. The Ice Gauntlet in New World specializes in crowd control skills and debuffs, especially slows. Now, this is one of the best, if not the best, support weapon for group content in New World because it just makes fights so much easier. Your tank will thank you for slowing down those enemies and helping to keep them packed closer together. Now, for armor on this build, a medium equip load will actually be the most balanced, giving you some extra physical and elemental resistance, while also giving you a 10% bonus to healing, while a light armor approach will give you 20% bonus healing, but at the cost of lower damage reductions. For attributes of choice on the Ice Cleric, Focus will be your primary stat, as this directly contributes to the power of healing, which is going to be extremely important for this build. So the more focus you have, the bigger your heals scale and effectiveness. I'd say as a secondary attribute, I would invest a little bit into Constitution as well for the extra bonus health. And finally, for skills on the Life Staff, make sure to pick up a targeted burst heal first, like Light's Embrace or Divine Embrace, as well as some group healing options such as Splash of Light and Beacon. For the Ice Gauntlet, again, our focus is going to be on crowd control skills, not so much damage. So abilities like Ice Storm and Ice Shower will be what we want to start with. Then Entombed is also highly recommended as a powerful defensive skill when you are in trouble. Next on our list of New World builds is the Hunter, a medium to long range damage specialist that excels out in the wide open spaces of Eternum. And the theme of this build, which you probably have guessed already, centers around using the bow as the primary weapon. Bows in New World are best at long range, letting you fire multiple shots into your target before they get a chance to close the distance. And if an enemy does get close to you, we've picked one of the best melee weapons in the game, that being the hatchet, to easily chop down foes as they approach us with already low health. Now for the armor choices on this build, a light equip load will result in the highest possible damage, with medium being a nice balance in between of slightly less damage, but better defenses. This allows you to wear a heavy chest piece, for example. For attributes on the Hunter build, dexterity will be your primary stat. This is due to the fact that the bow's primary scaling attribute is dexterity, guaranteeing some chunky bow shots that do big time damage. Dexterity also offers some great passive bonus milestones like more critical chance, more critical damage, and bonus damage to headshots. Strength will be another attribute you want to pick up, as this is the primary boosting stat attribute for the hatchet. And for bow skills, we'll be going with penetrating shot and rapid shot for the damage, and evade shot for when we need to keep our distance from enemies. For the hatchet skills, we'll be running the previously mentioned Berserk for the amazing healing and damage. We'll also be running Feral Rush for the mobility, and finally social distancing to create more space between us and enemies when we need it. Next up on our list is a build with fantastic defense and self-healing, which in turn makes for a very powerful solo setup. And this is going to be our version of a Templar build for New World, focused on crowd control, survivability, and quick bursts of damage. The main weapon for this build will be the Spear, which is a lot of fun to use in the game. Spear allows for some powerful sweeping attacks and knockdowns that will effectively stop enemies in their tracks, as well as some quick striking attacks and jabs that enable us to do bursts of damage and then roll dodge back out to avoid taking damage ourselves. Now combined with this, we'll be using the Life Staff for extra defense and passive self-healing provided by those ground-based heals that this weapon does so well. Many of these heals are sticky, meaning they attach to the ground or to nearby enemies, even when we're not using the Life Staff on this build. This is going to be great for keeping our health topped off while we punish enemies thoroughly with the spear attacks. Now for armor on the Templar build, I prefer the fast-paced risk-reward playstyle that light armor brings. This allows you to quickly dodge in and out of combat, avoid damage, and come up with new angles of attack. However, a heavy armor approach is also just as good. It's quite fun, and it will make your build much more defensive, letting you stand toe-to-toe with multiple enemies at once and absorbing a lot more incoming damage. Now the two main attributes you want for the Templar are going to be Dexterity to increase your spear's damage, and of course Focus to increase your healing. Finally, for skills on the Spear, we'll want Sweep and Vault Kick to easily knock down and control our enemies, plus either Skewer or Perforate for the extra damage. On the Life Staff, we'll want all the ground-based healing and defensive skills we can get. This includes abilities like Beacon, Orb of Protection, and Sacred Ground. Next on our list is going to be the Brawler build, an in-your-face monster perfect for visceral melee combat in both PvE and PvP situations. This build offers a great combination of AoE damage, crowd control, defense, and mobility, letting you stand up to multiple enemies at once with ease. Now for weapons on this build, we'll be combining the Sword and Shield as the primary weapon with the Great Axe as our secondary. We've talked about how versatile the Sword and Shield is already. With the right skills, it becomes an amazing tool for survival as well as dealing damage. And in the Great Axe, this is just an uber powerful damage dealing nightmare. This provides massive mobility, a targeted pull, and even more AoE damage or a single target execute skill if you prefer. Now for armor, I would highly recommend going full heavy on this build, as it will let you absorb the most damage possible and ensure the highest survivability, allowing you to take on multiple targets at once and stay in the fight longer. The primary attribute for this build, and both of our weapons of choice actually, is going to be Strength. So building heavily into that Strength attribute will result in the most effective gains in damage for both of our weapons. And as a purely melee close quarter style build, some Constitution is also recommended for the extra health. Now finally, in terms of skills, on the Sword and Shield we'll be using Whirling Blade for the AoE damage, and both Defiant Stance and Shield Bash for the defense and crowd control. For Great Axe, you will want Reap, which pulls enemies in closer, as well as Charge for the gap closer. Then you can also use Great Axe's Execute ability as an amazing finisher. This deals up to 300% weapon damage if you can get the lock on your target. Or you can use the Maelstrom ability for even more AoE damage potential. Next on our list of builds for New World is the Punisher, a crowd control specialist that's able to lock down and disable entire groups of enemies with stuns, knockbacks, and other crowd controlling skills to dominate the battlefield. Now, this build will feature the Warhammer as its primary weapon, which is a fantastic tool not only for its damage and AoE, but also for stuns and knockbacks. As a backup weapon, we've decided to use the Spear, as this weapon also has several knockdown and stun abilities, meaning no matter what weapon you have active at the time, you should have some way of punishing your enemies and locking them in place. And for Armor on the Punisher build, I would recommend using Heavy Armor, as this gives you bonuses not only to defense, but also to the duration of your crowd control debuff abilities, essentially keeping them in place for longer. And for attributes, Strength will be the primary stat you'll want to invest into for this build. Not only will this directly improve the damage of your Warhammer skills, but it's also a secondary buff to Spear abilities, and comes with some great passive buff milestones depending on how much total strength your character has unlocked. This includes increased light attack and heavy attack damage, as well as bonus damage to stunned enemies. Finally, for skills under the Warhammer, we'll want to unlock Clear Out and Shockwave for the knockdown and stun respectively. Then eventually, a more damage-oriented skill like Path of Destiny or Mighty Gavel for the AoEs. And for spear skills, you'll want to focus on the best crowd control abilities the weapon has to offer. This includes skills like Vault Kick, Sweep, and Javelin. Next up, we have a bit of a hybrid style build that we're calling the Battlemage. This build is a tough-as-nails melee fighter with a strong defense and healing output that also uses fire magic to burn enemies into a pile of ash. This build is also excellent for AoE grinding enemies and for group support. The Battlemage is going to feature Sword and Shield as the primary weapon, and as you've probably noticed, this is one of my favorite weapon options so far in New World. That's because it's highly balanced between its defensive and offensive skill trees, giving you lots of options for either a more damage-focused or a more healing and survival-focused character. To this, we'll be adding the Fire Staff as our secondary weapon for even more damage, including some powerful damage over time effects and AoEs, and even some built-in healing and mobility. For armor, I've gone with a full heavy setup on this build, including a Kite Shield for maximum defense, and the reason for this is we want to outlast our enemies as long as possible, to keep those fire dots ticking longer, and also to absorb damage as we group enemies together for those AoEs. For stats, Intelligence will actually be the primary stat here, as it will scale your Fire Staff abilities the best in terms of overall damage. You also want to keep an eye out for a sword with a gem slot, where you can slot some elemental damage. You can slot bonus lightning damage, fire damage, ice damage, whichever you prefer, and then this actually starts to scale your sword abilities with a percentage of your total intelligence as well. And as for skills, starting with the Sword and Shield, we'll want Whirling Blades for those AoEs, Defiant Stance for healing, and Shield Bash for the crowd control. On the Fire Staff, we'll want Incinerate for the AoE damage and dot effects, as well as Burnout for the mobility, and either Meteor Shower or Fireball for big fire damage. That brings us to our final outstanding build for New World, which is the Duelist. A precision-based build that excels at medium to long-range combat, damage over time, and maneuverability. Our primary weapon on this build is going to be the long-ranged musket. The musket in New World is a fantastic option for those that love to pick off targets from afar, as well as apply traps, bombs, and damage over time effects. Our secondary weapon on this build will be the rapier, which is an ultra-fast melee weapon, perfect for quickly dispatching targets if they manage to survive your initial musket shots. For armor on this build, you will most definitely want to go with a light equip load to maximize your damage by 20%, and also to unlock the best dodge roll in the game. For attributes, dexterity will buff both the rapier and the musket equally, so dumping all of your points into dex early on is definitely the best way to go on this setup. Finally, for skills on the musket, we'll want 2 powerful range shots in Power Shot and Powder Burn, and my favorite musket ability, the skill Trap, which roots your target in place, making them even more vulnerable to musket fire. For the rapier, Tondo is a very powerful bleed attack that can get even stronger when you refresh it, while Flourish and Finish can consume any stacked bleeds on your target and apply a big burst of damage all at once. Then there's Fletch, which is an impressive mobility skill that sends you flying through enemies in a stabbing motion forward that deals big time damage and can also help you reposition and outmaneuver anyone on the battlefield. So there you have it, everyone. 8 fantastic builds to help you get started in New World. If you enjoyed this video today or you found it informative, please do us a favor and crush that like button. And if you really enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for even more New World content. We are a brand new channel here on YouTube, and every single like, subscribe, and comment really makes a difference, so your help is much appreciated. Now, we do have several full video guides planned for the builds discussed in this video. Those will be coming out very soon, so make sure to subscribe with that notification bell turned on so you don't miss anything. Finally, we do have written guides for these builds with even more details on the way over on our website, rpgdojo.com, where we also have a full New World wiki and beginner's guide and much, much more. Links for all that content will be in the description if you want to check it out. With that said, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you around in the next video.